So I'll introduce Kyle. He is with Tall Timbers. Tall Timbers is one of the foremost nonprofit foundations in the country for quail management. They are based down in the Florida, Georgia line, close to that area down there. There you go. This guy knows better than I do. I'm hoping to go down there for the first time this spring. But Kyle has started a couple years ago now, and he's all about getting fire on the ground, prescribed burning, and that is what he's going to share with us today. You're mic'd up, so thank you, Kyle. Go
Awesome.
ahead.
Thanks, Luke. How's everyone doing today? Pretty good. Excellent opportunity we have here on the western side of the Chesapeake Bay anyways for quail. Pretty powerful thing that brings us all together. Like I said, excellent opportunity. Thanks, Luke, for the introduction. I'm Kyle Magdziuk. I work for Tall Timbers. I've been up on the Delmarva for almost 2 years now, being the prescribed fire coordinator and game bird biologist. So let's get into some prescribed fire things. And just before we start, how many folks here have some sort of prescribed fire experience? A lot more than I thought. That's awesome. All right, so just a little bit of an overview. We're going to talk about bobwhite ecology. Might be a little bit redundant, but getting back into some of those habitat requirements. We'll talk about good fire, some of the considerations for putting fire on your property, and then some of those resources that might be able to help you implement it. So when it comes to prescribed fire and using it for quail management, it's really important to understand its life history. So we'll pretty much start right there in April. Coveys are going to start to split up. They're going to form those mating pairs. All the way up till about July 15th is what we consider the early hatch or early nesting period. After July 15th up to about up in our region, September 1st, maybe through the middle of September, that's going to be considered the late nesting and brood rearing period. Starting beginning of October, a lot of our coveys are going to start to form. They're going to start to develop, those overwintering home ranges. And then they're going to go through that overwinter survival period and get back into breeding. So there's two variables that are extremely important to restoring populations, maintaining the long-term sustainability of them. The first is adult survival. And so getting birds from October back through to April, which that overwinter time period is the time period where they are most susceptible to predation, to death, their survival increases. Couple things going on there. Covers deteriorating throughout the winter time, significant snowfall events, all the above. So the more that we can do for habitat to get those adults from October back to April to get as many breeding individuals on the ground as possible is step number one. Step number two is chick survival. We want as many chicks going into that overwinter survival period as possible. Obviously, more birds going through and surviving is bigger population growth. So keep all of that in mind as we work through this fire presentation here. So just to reiterate a lot what Luke said, bobwhite habitat needs, general rule of thumb is that rule of thirds. A third of that habitat should be comprised of grasses for nesting cover, loafing cover, maybe a little bit of escape cover. Third of it should be comprised of forbs with bare ground underneath for adequate brooding cover, roosting cover, things like that. And then the other third should be comprised of shrubs for escape cover, thermal cover during the summertime, and then again during those significant snowfall events. Up here at our latitude, where winter snow events can be detrimental, maybe we emphasize that shrub cover a little bit more than just a third. So how do we maintain all of that? One of the pillars to quail habitat management I'd like to consider is prescribed fire, amongst a few other different things. So let's talk about it. Why is fire good? Well, if you think about it, it's the only naturally occurring management tool that we have available to us. If you look at Aldo Leopold, his 5 pillars of habitat management, the cow, the plow, the axe, the gun, and then it's prescribed fire. Right. So prescribed fire is going to be the key to maintaining good quail habitat. What does it do? It resets succession. So we saw that figure that Luke put up, of secondary, tertiary succession, and then in a disturbance that resets it. Fire is going to be your friend there. Amongst other things, it mitigates the risk of wildfire. That's big out in the west part of the region, even in or western part of the country, even in Delaware, some of those marshy areas. It promotes bare ground, which stimulates a lot of new growth, a lot of your ground cover, and then also improves ecosystem resilience, helps prevent disease, prevents a lot of those insect outbreaks like ticks and everything associated with them. So getting into some of these considerations for implementing prescribed fire, there are 3 important variables listed in order of importance here. Fire frequency, and we'll get into these a little bit more. Fire frequency, scale, and fire timing. So basically, what time of year are you putting fire on the ground? So the first being frequency. General rule of thumb is that 1 to 2 year interval, right? So maybe you're burning one thing. If you look at the checkerboard, you're burning the white 1 year, you're burning the black the next. General rule of thumb. Keep your shrub cover in mind. A lot of different managers might manage their shrub cover a little differently. They might increase that fire frequency. Say between 3 and 5 years, you're running fire through a shrub thicket or something like that. Other folks are getting in using those hack and squirt methods that Luke mentioned. And then very important, we'll touch on this a little later, is the juxtaposition or how these burn units are arranged across your property or across the landscape. If you look at the checkerboard here, it's not those individual black or white squares that the habitat is. The habitat is where all of those come together, where quail, other wildlife is going to have everything they need right there available to them. Fire scale, 2 things that we think about. The grain, how big that patch is that you're burning. Say you're burning tomorrow, how big is that going to be? For quail, that's going to be the smallest that's operationally feasible for the burn program that you might have. TNC, they might be burning 100, 200, 300 acres in a given day, whereas, we might be burning half acre all the way up to 20 acres or something like that. But we have a lot less land to manage than what TNC does on an annual basis. And so the other thing that we want to consider is also the extent. So if you zoom out a little bit more, how much are you burning in any given season? General rule of thumb for using fire for quail management is 50% of that manageable habitat every year should be burned. Looking at that using a property in Talbot County. So say each of these different shades of color are about 100 acres, right? So, 1 year you might burn that white or gray area, that might be 100 acres. And then the next you're burning another 100 acres being that black. Well, it's awesome that you're burning, but we can make this better. Let's break it up a little bit more. Like I said, going as small as operationally feasible, still burning 100 acres each year, but it's broken up a little bit more. Well, this manager today is burning something more like this. See where all of that black and that white comes together? That's a lot of that habitat. Still plenty of usable space, but where those 2 things come together are going to be where all of those resources are, where quail needs to complete its life cycle. So think about this and that grain aspect of how big you're burning in a single day. Think of each of these squares on this figure here as increasing patch size. Think of that black as that species that your objectives are surrounding. Here we'd be talking about quail. Think of that black as the amount of that space that quail is going to be using. So the bigger you increase your patch size, the less they're going to use the center of that. This is very applicable to turkeys as well. After about 200 meters of getting away from an unburned edge, that use for turkeys significantly declines. And then let's talk about timing here. Fire seasonality, we want to maximize species survival. And so using a couple of these diagrams, I'll preface this is from the southeast, but this is, the black line is trends in accipiter and then buteo abundance as they migrate. And so this line here being between March and April for accipiters, down here is between February and March, or March and April for buteos. Where do you think a lot of those managers are burning their land down in the Red Hills of South Georgia and North Florida? What's that? Nope. So they're probably going to be, well, they burn between March and April when those raptor abundances are at its least. All those birds are coming up here. Like I said, this is applicable to the southeast, but just to paint the picture, you know, we're not going to necessarily burn that during a time that is going to confine birds to a certain patch. That way they're just, you know, getting picked off. So back to burning in the fall. Burning in the fall can be extremely effective. And on the next slides, I'll show why. But like I said, that overwinter survival period, that's when they're the most susceptible. So you don't want to eliminate cover in a landscape, in our working landscape, where they get confined when all the crops come off to that existing habitat. You don't want to minimize that. So a couple of examples of how fire can be used effectively. Again, this is that property in Talbot County. On the left side of the screen here, it is a CRP buffer that has gotten overrun by sweet gums. And this was pretty good cover, but maybe this year, next year, that would have been not usable by quail. And underneath it was a bed of tall fescue. And so using a combination of prescribed fire and herbicide, able to burn that off. So we sprayed that first, got rid of the sweet gums, burned it off. I think this was, because it was CRP, it was burned August 16th to allow some growth to come back up before that overwinter survival period hits. That's what it looked like afterwards. This is what it looks like today. This was actually taken yesterday. Just excellent brooding cover. That's partridge pea. There's black-eyed Susans coming up in there. Very little sweet gum response from that whole method there. So this is a little bit different combination of management methods. This was burned and then disked. Objective behind that was to mitigate a lot of those native warm season grasses that got rank and thick that Luke was alluding to. This was burned and then disked pretty heavily. And you can see in there, there's some laser work on this. Let's see, what do we got here? A lot of goldenrod, a lot of ragweed. Ragweed's one of my favorites for brooding cover. A lot of partridge pea coming in. That is just phenomenal brooding cover. And so let's go back a little bit to that juxtaposition of habitat that I was alluding to. This was down at the Nesawongo Creek Preserve that's managed by the Nature Conservancy. And I just want to ask y'all, what do you notice with this photo here?
Higher grass component on the left.
Higher grass component on the left. What's on the right? More woodies, but more specifically, a lot more forbs. Anybody else? Bare ground. So on the right, we have that brooding cover that we want for expediting that growth of our quail chicks. On the left, we have that nesting cover, some of that escape cover, which you can't see back this way. There's a lot of shrub components back here. But this is arranged in a way where the stuff on the right, that was burned this past, I believe it was April. And then this is due to be burned again either next year or the year after that. But what is happening here is quail chicks, quail broods, what have you, they can't fly, they can't thermoregulate until they are about 2 weeks of age, 14 days. And so having that nesting cover where they can nest and hatch out and this clump here go right across the road 15 yards and be in quality brooding habitat, that can expedite their that growth process where they have that brooding cover, they have a lot of insects that are attracted to that brooding cover. That might expedite their growth process by a day or two, which can be significant long-term. Right, so minimizing that distance that a quail chick needs to travel to get to adequate brooding cover is going to be huge for their survival. And so that's why I say, you know, the habitat isn't right dead in the center of that white block or right in the dead center of that black block. It's right in the middle where all those come together. That's where the most amount of resources are going to be available. To wrap it up, some of the resources to help y'all get fire on the ground here. The DNR, Forest Service, I don't believe DNR charges for putting fire on the ground for you. Forest Service, I think it's between like $15, $17 an acre just to cover the cost of fuel and whatnot. They're not trying to make a dollar off of it. The Nature Conservancy, Chase McLean is the president of the Maryland Prescribed Fire Council, which I have listed here. If you aren't involved with the Maryland Fire Council, there are going to be opportunities for you to get involved. Luke and Extension, Quail Forever, and then just a few other things here. I have that Eastern Shore Prescribed Burn Association. That is a community effort of landowners coming together to help other landowners out. Share resources, knowledge, experiences. That one is going to be confined to the 9 counties of the Eastern Shore, but hopefully it sets up a template for you all to set one up yourself. So if you're sitting here thinking that, you know, there's no way that you can put prescribed fire on the ground or it might not be worth it, you know, I just want to leave you with this. Herbert Stoddard, father of fire ecology. Fire may well be the most important single factor in determining what animal and vegetable life will thrive in many areas. At least just get on board with prescribed fire. It is a really good thing. It is safe. It can be safe if preparation was put in up front, and it's responsible. It's not like a wildfire. So just a few examples of how this can affect other species. Let's see if I can get this to work. Woodcock doing a happy dance. This was in Talbot County. This was Northern Kent County. A day after we burned, prescribed fire creates this kind of magnet effect for, you know, up to a year after something was burned. Everything is benefiting from it. So there's 2 nice longbeards sitting there a day after we burned this block. And this was East Texas, but as you can see, still smoking in the background, our Firebird. And with that, if y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Local landowner that wanted to get fire on the ground, how much of a backlog is there with like DNR? Oh, sorry. So if you're a local landowner that wanted to get fire on the ground, what is the backlog if you were reaching out to one of the organizations or DNR that you wanted to kind of sign up for? What's the time frame, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. That kind of depends. You know, I think not this past spring, but the spring before, it was a very wet spring. So they had a backlog built up for this past spring. You know what I mean? So, you know, there were very limited burn days this past year. They were able to get caught up a little bit. Also depends on the region, what some of those, you know, some of that capacity looks like. But they are more times than not more than happy to work with you to figure out best timing and things like that.
Some of the weeds, some of the grass that grew out of first.
Mhm.
Seed those first. You mentioned some of the grasses or shrubs that grow after burn.
And, but do you seed those or are those just natural occurring?
Both.
Okay.
A lot of the cedars, they come up naturally. Again, it just kind of depends on soil types, region, things like that. You know, we were having that discussion on autumn olive. A lot of folks were working on getting rid of autumn olive to get that natural native seed bank to respond. A lot of folks are seeing spice bush come up after that. So more times than not, it's you know, exposing that bare ground, letting the native seed bank respond. Great question.
Is there federal money available? You say a clear cut in the early stage through prescribed fire?
So question is there federal money to implement fire after a clear cut or something like that? That I'm not sure of. There might be some sort of cost share associated with, you know, just the practice of prescribed fire. I think Sierra might touch on that. But more times than not, that could be, you know, something that Forest Service comes in to help burn for you. In terms of, that would kind of depend on your property objective, right? If you wanted to maintain for future forest products, you probably wouldn't burn. You know, but if you're managing for quail, you probably wouldn't want any of those loblolly pine or anything there anyways. But I don't think, you know, to answer your question directly, I don't think there's any offset for any of that, you know, loss of income. There are forest stewardship plans that you know, can help out with, you know, identifying what some of your objectives are for you know, your forest, whether that be for future forest products or you know, for wildlife. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you all.